Yeah, so just to recap for those who weren't able to hear the last message, I spoke about having the right structure. And as believers, I feel like when it comes to church and God and Christianity, we have to undo a lot of what we've been taught and a lot of what we've learned, whether it's through experience or through other people. So I started last time by reading an article to you guys really quick. It goes at 10 a.m. on the morning of November 7th, 1940. Professor Burt was one of the few people standing on the world's third longest bridge as it bounced and twisted. And he probably knew better than anyone else how she behaved in a gale. But this we knew from the night of the day the bridge opened, that something was wrong. He said later, something was very wrong, and with each wave of steel and concrete, it seemed to be getting wronger. And somewhere out on the twisting span, you see it in that dream, like the footage, a car was sliding across the deck. From afar, the Tacoma Narrows Bridge looked like a long ribbon stretching across Washington's Puget Sound on windy days. It acted a lot like one too. Even before it opened on the public, 4 months earlier in July of 1940, the center span suspended from two massive towers had a tendency to dance, and in light winds, slow rolling waves could ripple across the concrete and steel deck with only minor damage. It seemed like something was raising and dropping it by as much as 10 feet. Engineers sought a way to stop her from swaying back and forth, and somebody came up with the nickname Galloping Gertie after a popular saloon piano song, and it stuck. The bridge officials assured the public was safe, and within months it became a central part of the local economic and military interests, cutting the 2.5-hour drive between Tacoma, Washington, and the Kitsap Peninsula down to 11 minutes. Now, for some motorists and pedestrians, this rolled like a coaster with a cheap thrill and just a dime. Her lightweight steel girders and thin layer of concrete permitted a certain unusual unflexibility, but no one was quite sure why she flexed in the wind or what it might lead to. But at 10 a.m. on November 7th, none of that mattered. For about an hour, Gertie had been undulating higher than usual as the winds reached speeds of 40 miles per hour. This was faster wind than Gertie was used to, but a speed that her engineers thought she had been designed for. And now for the first time, she wasn't undulating, she was twisting. It had never done that before. Half an hour earlier, around 9:30, authorities had closed the bridge to traffic, just as one last car was making the crossing. Leonard Coatsworth, news editor, was on his way to his family's summer cottage, and when he heard the news, the bridge had collapsed. And so I brought that illustration out in the beginning to show you once again why it's important to have the right structure. And those who built the bridge didn't necessarily take into account and count the cost, and it ended up collapsing. And as we'll take a deeper look today, we'll see exactly, do we have the same similarities as this bridge that we just read about back in 1940? All right. So everybody turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 5 and just hold it right there for one moment. So today's topic and today's message is going to be having the right structure, part 2. And this is a continuation of the last message that we gave. This was back March 14th. This is before the pandemic broke out, about 10 weeks ago. All right. So last time we talked about having and recognizing the right order in our life, right? We talked about having the right structure in terms of making up what we want to do in our minds. And we also talked about what happens if our perspective is off. So today we're going to cover, the first point we're going to take a look at is the right structure in the view of God and our position when it comes to him in a relationship. When we think of God, do we think of a far off image, or do we think of our relationship being in the way that he designed it to actually be? We're going to take a look at the right structure against our current situation. Right now, we obviously know there's a pandemic that's going on. We're going to see how having the right structure will help us to deal with that. We're also going to take a look at the right structure and our thinking against culture's idea of God and church, and what some people will call holy. And then we're also going to take a look at the right structure of our deepness as it relates to our relationship with God. All right. So first, our accurate image of God and our relationship with him. So the God that we serve, we know that he is all powerful. We know that he is the creator. We know that he is the beginning and the end. He's the Alpha and the Omega. He's perfect. He's never made a mistake. He knows everything, and he is everywhere. And every wrong that we see going on right now in this world, he will make right. He's a God of infinite power. So let's take a look in 1 Samuel chapter 5. Told y'all to turn that like there yet. 1 Samuel chapter 5. And we're going to look at a story. And in this story, you have God's people, Israel, and they're going up against another group of people called the Philistines. And so the Philistines, they have many gods, but this one God in particular, they believe that he's in charge of nature, and they believe that he somehow has an effect on their crops. Agricultural life was big back then. So they believe in this God. His name is Dagon. All right. So we're going to pick up in 1 Samuel chapter 5, verse 1. It says, then the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. And when the Philistines took the ark of God, they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon. And when the people of Ashdod arose early in the morning, there was Dagon fallen on his face to the earth before the ark of the Lord. So they took Dagon and they set it in its place again. So what happened was the Philistines defeated the Israelites. And so when they defeated the Israelites, it was customary to take their belongings. And one of the belongings they took was the Ark of the Covenant of God. And that was a priceless possession for a number of reasons, but this was the Israelites' prized possession. And so the Philistines, now that they were victorious over the Israelites, they put this Ark of Covenant next to their false god in his temple. So the first morning they rose up and they saw that Dagon had fell on his face. Now to also give some backstory to that as well, back then during those times, there were many different gods. And so they would actually have physical representations of those gods. And that's what was occurring right here. So we're going to look at verse 4. And when they arose early the next morning, there was Dagon falling on his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. The head of Dagon and both the palms of his hands were broken off on the threshold. Only Dagon's torso was left of it. Therefore, the priest of Dagon, nor any who came into Dagon's house, tread on the threshold of Dagon into Ashdod unto this day. But the hand of the Lord was heavy on the people of Ashdod, and he ravaged them and struck them with tumors, both Ashdod and its territory. And when the men of Ashdod saw how heavy it was, they said, the ark of the God of Israel must not remain with us. Must not remain with us. Therefore, they sent and gathered themselves. We're going to start at verse 8. Therefore, they sent and gathered to themselves all the lords of the Philistines and said, what shall we do with the ark of the God of Israel? And they answered, let the ark of the God of Israel be carried away to Gath. So they carried the ark of the God of Israel away. So it was after that they had carried it away that the hand of the Lord was against the city with a great destruction. And he struck the men of the city, both small and great, and tumors broke out on them. Therefore, they sent the ark of God to Ekron. So it was, as the ark of God came to Ekron, the Ekronites cried out, saying, they have brought us the ark of God of Israel to kill us and our people. So what we get from that story and that example is not only is our God supreme, he's not one of many gods. He is the only God. And so when we have an accurate image of him, even the people who were on the negative side of this, they knew only a limited amount, but they knew that there was something special about this ark of God, the ark of this covenant of God, and they knew it was something special about the Israelites and the God that they serve. Now, like we were saying earlier, our God is having an accurate image of him. He is the only God. He's the beginning. He's the end. Turn with me to Daniel chapter 4. And in the fourth chapter of Daniel, and we'll see what happens when we have a skewed view of the one and only creator God. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon. Babylon was another mighty country, a mighty nation that was victorious over God's people. And as custom, once they were victorious over them, they took them as slaves into their native land, into their country. And so the king at the time who was over Babylon was Nebuchadnezzar. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was high and mighty. And you got to think, kings during that time period, they really thought that they were God themselves. So the fact that there was this God that they could not see, that other people lived their life for and ascribed to, that angered them. And so in this story, we're going to see is an example of someone who did not know God, learning the true God, learning about him the hard way. In Daniel chapter 4, Nebuchadnezzar the king, to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I thought it good to declare the signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me. How great are his signs and how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in my house and flourishing in my palace. So he's telling the story himself. He's letting you know firsthand what happened. He said, I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts on my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore, I issued a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known to me the interpretation of the dream. Then the magicians, the astrologers, the Chaldeans, the soothsayers came in, and I told them the dream, but they did not make known to me its interpretation. But at last, Daniel came in. Daniel was one of the Israelites, and he had his name changed to Belshazzar once he actually became a part of their nation. So Belshazzar, chief of the magicians, because I know that the spirit of the holy God is in you and no secret troubles you, explain to me the visions of my dream that I have seen and its interpretations. These were the visions of my head before while I lay on my bed. I was looking, and behold, a tree in the midst of the earth, and its height was great. The tree grew and became strong. Its height reached to the heavens, and it could be seen to the ends of all the earth. Its leaves were lovely, its fruit abundant, and in it was food for all. The beasts of the field found shade under it. The birds of the heavens dwelt in the branches, and all flesh was fed from it. Now, he didn't know at the time, but that was the eternal God speaking to him symbolically and showing him his position as it relates to God. Verse 13, he said, I saw in the vision of my head while on my bed, and there was a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven. He cried aloud and said, chop down the tree and cut off its branches, strip off his leaves and scatter his fruit, lest let the beast get out from him under it and the birds from his branches. Nevertheless, the stump and the roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, and the tender grass of the field, let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let him gaze with the beast on the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from that to the heart of a man. Let him be given the heart of a beast, and let 7 times pass over him. This decision is by the decree of the watchers, and the sentence by the word of the holy ones, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men, gives it to whomever he wills, and sets it over the lowest of men. Now he says, in order that the living may know that the Most High rules in the kingdoms of men. So what happened here was Nebuchadnezzar ended up having the wrong viewpoint, the wrong structure. He thought that he was in charge. And so you got to understand, when you are in a position like that and you are in charge of a very powerful nation, a very powerful country, and you think that you are in charge, he had an inaccurate view of what we would call the wrong structure of who was actually in charge. And he learned the hard way. God basically caused him to go insane, to humble him so that he could have an accurate image of who God really is. And he let him know who's in charge. Now, knowing these things, you know, sometimes it kind of seems basic. When I look out and I see different people and I see life, you would think that most people say, use church lingo, and they're like, well, yeah, God is in control. I know this, I know that. But regardless of how they're using that phrase, he really is in control. And he really is number one. And it's dangerous if we somehow lose sight of that. It's dangerous if we somehow just run away with that idea that I'm in charge. And so we may not have had this same experience. We may not be a president or a king that needs humbling in this way, but I'm pretty sure if we take a look, we can see ourselves in this story. All right. So one of my favorite scriptures, and the psalmist David wrote it, whom I get my name from, turn to Psalm 139. And we're going to see a much better version of having an accurate view and the right structure of God. And this scripture, in this chapter, is humbling to me just to know that God knows every part of me, to know that he knows my weaknesses, my strengths. He knows it all. He knows what I'm going to say before I say it. He knows my likes and my dislikes. He knows it all. He has perfect knowledge. He knows how many hairs I have on my head. He knows it all. All right. Psalms 139, verse 1, it says, "O Lord, you have searched me and you know me. You know my sitting down and my rising up. You understand my thoughts afar off. You comprehend my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all of my ways. For there is not a word on my tongue, but behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You have hedged me behind and before, and you have laid upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me." Let's go down to verse 9. It says, "If I take my wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall fall on me, even the night shall be light about me. Even the darkness shall not hide from you, but the night shines as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to you. For you formed my inward parts. You covered me in my mother's womb. And I will praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Marvelous are your works, and that my soul knows very well. My frame was not hidden from you. He knew you before you arrived in this earth." Let's go to verse 17. "How precious also are your thoughts to me, O God. How great is the sum of them. How, if I should count them, they would be more in number than the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. Depart from me, therefore, bloodthirsty men, for they speak against you." And let's go down to verse 23. It says, "Search me and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties, and see if there's any wicked way in me, and lead me in the everlasting way." Psalm verse 139, we see right there, that's an accurate view of God. We know that he is number one. We know that he is in charge. We know that he has perfect knowledge over us. He knows everything about us better than we know about ourselves. And so that is a more humbling, a more precious way of recognizing our relationship as it pertains to God, and realizing that, he is in heaven, he's above, and we are down below. We are his children. No matter how old we get, we are his children. So next, we're going to take a look at having the right structure despite the pandemic. Now, this is going to be the meat of the message, because I always want to start with having an accurate view of God, because everything else is going to flow from there. Once we know who he is, we know who we are as it relates to him, then we can go out and then we can live day to day. Okay? So right now, my question is, what has happened in your life? What is happening in your life right now? And what will happen in your life that God doesn't know about? There's nothing. So he wasn't sitting in heaven and he was like, oh man, it's about to be a pandemic. Let me see what I'm going to do. He already knew what was going to happen. And he already knew how we would respond to that. And so I want to challenge you guys to keep the right attitude during this pandemic. And we spoke about it last time, and I shared with you guys, my struggles outside, the last 3 or 4 years haven't been the easiest for me. And I told you, it's been challenging, but I have sought to have the right attitude throughout the entire time. Now, I'm not perfect and I have not always been successful, but I have strived for that, to have that right attitude, because I know it's someone bigger than me that can make my way. So I know it's frustrating, with job loss. I think it's like 30 million people who are filed for unemployment, and who knows how accurate the numbers are, but even if it's somewhere in that ballpark, it's still pretty bad, obviously. And then during this time, we've lost loved ones. Lost my grandfather last week. He was 91 years old, very righteous man in Jamaica. His name is Isaac Augustus Brown, and he lived 91 years, which just is a drop in the bucket to God. But my heart goes out to so many families who have suffered loss during this time period, and they can't get a chance to say a proper goodbye. And so God knows that, and he sees that. And he will act on that. Let's look at someone who had a right attitude during this time. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 37. We're going to take a look at a young man named Joseph. Now, you talk about somebody who had the right attitude, man. Joseph is much better than me. Joseph literally got in trouble for doing the right thing. And I don't know if it's not recorded in the scripture, I don't see, but there may have been times when Joseph was looking like, man, had to be. And he still had the right attitude. So we're going to take a look at his story, and we're going to compare that to what we're currently going through right now with the pandemic, because people are like, man, I'm stuck in the house and I got to work from home. And then some people are like, man, you got a job to work from home? Some people are like, you got a house to live in? What's the phrase? They said, you met the man who complained about having messed up shoes, and then he met the man who had no feet. So during this time in this pandemic, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that, every day is going to be 100. Every day is going to be like, man, today was fantastic. But overall, how's your attitude? Overall. Because there definitely been spurts where the last 3 or 4 years, I was like, as far as my career goes, I've been outside of my career. And I've strove to have the right attitude during that time. So I know what it's like to not have a job, keep looking for one, finally get one, and then God for him to open up and make a way. So I think I told y'all the last time I was here, I had challenges on my last job. The week after I spoke here, I got fired from that job. The next day I got hired at another one. Now, some people believe in coincidences. I choose to believe that was him opening the door. And then on top of that, this is a way better situation than my last one. So God is definitely able to take you from one season to the next. Speaking from experience. So let's look at let's look at this, and let's look at all these situations. So Joseph, God chose him from the beginning. He was favored by his father Jacob, right? At a young age too. Now, Joseph, the Bible says he was 17, he was young. He didn't always use wisdom when he came to expressing that favor, right? Because God gave him a dream and said, hey, your brothers you're going to be in control one day, basically. And he ran out, probably like a 17-year-old who didn't do stuff done when they were 17, or could have made better choices. I'm 31, I still don't make the best choices. But at 17, he was like, basically, man, he told him the dream, and then from there, they became a target. And it still didn't justify what his brothers did to him. But we'll see as we go along. So Genesis 37. And we're going to let's start with verse 3. It says, now Israel loved Jacob more than all of his children because he was a son in his old age. And also he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him, and he could not speak peaceably to him. Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, please hear this dream. So he told them the dream. He said, there were binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And indeed, your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And his brother said to him, shall you indeed reign over us, or shall you indeed have dominion over us? So they hated him more even for his dream. All right, so he told them the dream. So we're going to go down to verse 12. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem, and Israel said to Joseph, are you not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send them to you. So he said to him, here I am. Then he said to him, please go and see if it is well with your brother. So he went to go check on his brothers, right? And then we're going to go down to let's go to verse 15. And now a certain man found him, and there he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, what are you seeking? So he said, I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks. And the man said, they have departed from there, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them there, right? Now, when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Now, that's pretty heavy stuff. I know we kind of read over stuff in the Bible and gloss over that, but that's pretty deep, right? I have 3 brothers, and I hope that they would never have fought anything like that. When I was, because side note, I used to be the child that told the truth all the time. So whenever my brothers did anything, my mom knew who to go to. So that kind of made me a target a little bit. So I kind of feel a little bit. So they knew who to go to, right? So it says, come therefore, we're in verse 19. Then they said to one another, look at this dreamer, he's coming. Therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into the pit. And we shall say, some wild beast has devoured him. So we're going to kill him and we're going to lie about it. But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. And so, sometimes like you see right there in that situation where Reuben was like, and he was still a part of his regular evil plan, but God still spared him because they were going to kill him. But then he was like, nah, we're going to do this instead. And I say that to say that was part of God's plan, even though he was still in the evil plan, if that makes sense. And then Reuben said, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit, which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and might bring him back to his father. So he was sold into slavery by his brothers, right? That was the first one. Then we're going to go down to verse 28. Then the Midianite traders passed by, so the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. He was sold for 20 shekels of silver. Now imagine Joseph's mentality right now. Like, what is he even thinking? First of all, my brothers are against me. I got sold into slavery. I'm just laying out the story for you as it relates to what most of America is going through right now in terms of the pandemic. And it will help us put it into perspective. So we know, like I always said, we can look back at this story through the Bible and know how it played out. But Joseph lived it, so he didn't know how it played. He didn't know if he was going to die the next day or not, or if he was going to make it through that journey, where he's going, who's he with, any of that. That's pretty heavy. And I don't think anything that we're going through right now with the pandemic can relate to that in that situation, not minimizing anything that anybody's going through once again. But when I stop and I put it in perspective, it's like, man. So let's go over a few chapters. We're going to go to chapter 39. So Joseph, he was taken to Egypt. He's in Egypt now, right? And so we're going to start at verse 1. It says, now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. In verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. And his master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord made all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and served him. Then he made him overseer of his house and all that he had put under his authority. So it was from the time that he had made him overseer of his house and all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake, and the blessing of the Lord was all on that he had in the house in the field. So my question is it possible that an all-powerful God that we say we believe in, is he able to take care of us inside of a bad situation? That's just a possibility, right? He's able to do that. I read that it said everything that can be done, God can do it. So if it can be done, he can do it. So inside of this current situation that we got going on, even before the pandemic started, is it possible that he can do it? All that can be done, he can do. He's the only one that can do that. So inside of a really bad situation, God found favor for his servant. And he didn't just find a little bit of favor, he put him in charge. So he's in charge, he's under the rulership of somebody that does not know the one and only true God. So then let's go over to verse 21, and I'm skipping around because it's kind of a longer story and it's kind of spans through a couple of chapters. So let's go down to verse 21. We're in chapter 39. Once again, we see that phrase. It says, "But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison." All right. Now, verse 40. "It came to pass after these things that the butler and the baker, the king of Egypt, offended their lord, the king of Egypt, and Pharaoh was angry with his two officers, the chief butler and the chief baker. So he put them in custody in the house of the captain of the guard in the prison, in the place where Joseph was confined. And the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them. So they were in custody for a while." So these two dudes, they locked up. They all of them in jail, the butler, the baker, and Joseph. Verse 5, "Then the butler and the baker, the king of Egypt, who were confined in the prison, had a dream, both of them. Each man's dream in one night, and each man's dream with his own interpretation. And Joseph came to them in the morning and looked at them and saw that they were sad. And he asked Pharaoh's officers who were with him in the custody of his lord's house, saying, 'Why do you look so sad today?' And they said to him, 'We each have a dream, and there's no interpreter of it.' So Joseph said to them, 'Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell them to me, please.' Then the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, 'Behold, in my dream a vine was before me, and the vine were 3 branches. It was as though it budded, it blossomed, shot forth, and its clusters brought forth ripe of grapes. Then Pharaoh's cup was in my right hand, and I took the grapes and I pressed them into Pharaoh's cup and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand.' And Joseph said to him, 'This is the interpretation of it.'" So let's not gloss over the fact that he was able to interpret their dreams. That's favor again, the fact that he was able, because he could have said, "Hey man, tell me your dream." And then he was like, he was able to interpret his dream, but God did it through him. So then he says in verse 12, "And Joseph said to him, 'This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Now within 3 days, Pharaoh will lift you up, your head, and restore you to your place. And you will put Pharaoh's cup in his hand according to the former manner when you were his butler. But remember me when it is well with you, and please show kindness to me. Make mention of me to Pharaoh and get me out of this house.'" Basically, get me out of this situation. "For indeed I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, and also I have done nothing here that they should put me into the dungeon." So when the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said to Joseph, "I was also in my dream." So he's like, man, he just told him his dream. I'm going to do the same thing. I hope mine is going to be the same. Right? I'm going to cut ahead and let you know it wasn't. Right? It wasn't. So 2 people. So he's locked up with 2 dudes. One of them is going to get out. Once one of them gets out, he's going to be restored back. Once the other one gets out, he's going to be put to death. All Joseph asked was, "Hey, remember me when you get out, so that way I can have a chance of getting out of here." So then, let's go down to verse 20. "Now it came to pass on the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and the baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief butler to his butlership again." That was the first dude. "And then he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand," just like he did in his dream. "But he hanged the chief baker as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him." So once again, inside of that situation, disappointment. Man, I went out for that job. I thought I was going to get it. Everything looked good. I was about to get it. Nope. Man, situation right now with my marriage, I thought things were going to good. It was going to be good. Nope. Disappointment within that situation. But guess where God was the whole time? Still where he is. Now I know a lot of times it's hard to, we read scripture, read the Bible, and you hear cliches like, "Oh, have faith," and this and that. But it's one thing when you look around and you serve a God that you can't see all the time, you can't hear, you can't feel, but you still have to trust him. So it's not even about when you at church on Sunday morning or Saturday morning. It's like it's Tuesday morning and then the car won't start. Or I got this other issue going on. And then I can't see this God. I can't hear him. I can't feel him. What am I going to do? Because then at that point, I have to go against everything that I already am. I have to go against my flesh. I have to go against me to be what God wants me to be in that situation so that I can keep that right structure and be where I'm supposed to be. So then let's go over to chapter 41, and we're going to go down to verse 37. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and the eyes of all his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, "Can we find such a one as this, a man in whom is the Spirit of God?" Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "Inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled accordingly to your word. Only in regard to the throne, I will be greater than you." So then Joseph rose to power. God had favor on him. Speed up the story a little bit. He had favor on him within that bad situation, elevated him to a position to literally he was number 2. He was as high as he could be in the land. And he didn't put him higher than him because it was his land, so he had to be number 1. But he put him right under him. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, "See, I have set you over the land of Egypt." So we have somebody that was conspired against by his brothers, that they wanted to kill him. Then they sold him into slavery. Then he was lied on. Then he was locked up in jail again, thought he was going to get out. He didn't. And then after all of that, he still was elevated to this power. Is it possible that God could do that for us during the pandemic, whoever it may need to be? That's tough. And I tell in this story, and then we know it goes on to say Joseph's brothers, so there was this famine and Joseph's brothers came back. So he had to face the people who had wronged him. He had to face the people who had wronged him because they were in need. And then he was in a position, in a powerful position, where he could have retaliated. Let's look at verse 41. We're going to go to 46. It said, Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before the king of Pharaoh. And then let's go to verse 57. It says, so all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain because the famine was severe in all lands. Chapter 42, verse 1. It says, when Jacob saw that there was grain in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, why do you look at one another? Indeed, I've heard that there is grain in Egypt. So basically, where they at right now, they don't have any food. And his dad was like, hey, I heard there's some food over there. So verse 3, Joseph's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt, but Jacob did not send Joseph's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity befall him. And the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Now Joseph was governor over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people in the land. So basically, he was where his brothers were about to come. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them and spoke roughly to them. Then he said to them, where do you come from? So it kind of took him by surprise a little bit. And you can imagine how he feels in this moment. Like, man, he probably ain't seen them in years. He probably only, he's thinking himself like, do they recognize me? I recognize them. They're thinking like, man, we just need some food. All of these things are going on at one time in their mind, on their perspective, and then in his mind, his perspective. And it's like, man. So I can't imagine the mixed emotions that he had in that moment. And they said, from the land of Canaan to buy food. So Joseph recognized his brother, but they did not recognize him. Then Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed about them and said to them, you are spies. You have come to see me in the nakedness of the land. And they said to him, no, my lord, but your servants had come to buy food. So basically Joseph's angle to reveal himself to his brothers was to accuse them of something so that he could kind of get them in a position where he could reveal himself to them. Which is probably a better, probably something he just thought of at the moment on the spur, but it was like, that's how it ended up working out. So story goes, he reconciled with his brothers. But the whole point of that was to show you all that God can take care of us in the midst of a tough situation, speaking from experience. All that can be done, he can do it. Now, like we were saying earlier, and this is another thing that's been heavy on me too, is like, God is a God of justice, right? We already saw earlier that God is not just one God among many gods. He is the God. He's eternal. He's all powerful, infinite, wise, all that, but he's a God of justice. God is for everything that is right. He's for that. He's a God of righteousness, right? And so another thing that's going on currently right now is, and it's really been going on for centuries, is the brutality against people of color, specifically Black men in this country. And so it's everybody's responsibility to speak up for what's right. And in whatever capacity you can, whether you are the highest ranking official or whatever your occupation is, God is a God of justice. And when I look at the certain situations, one of them that's in Brunswick, Georgia, which is about 4.5 hours south of here, a young man, 25-year-old Black male, out running, minding his own business. And he was attacked by two individuals, two white men, and the whole thing was recorded by another white man. And in their minds, they believed that they were exercising justice. And long story short, he was out jogging, he got cornered, they had guns, they shot him, they killed him, he's dead. Now, regardless of the details of the story, the most important thing in this situation is that a life is lost. It doesn't matter if he was actually stealing prior to that. His life is gone. His life is gone. And so I'm tying that back in because this right now, and on top of all of that too, this happened in February. The world basically didn't find out about this until 2.5 months later. And the only reason they found out about it is because a video went viral. So if I take a step back for a moment and I stop and I think, now outside of being a decent human being, whether I'm a Christian or not, and I look at that situation and I think, man, what does God think about that in heaven? He cannot be pleased with that. Now, some people may argue and say, well, they were exercising their right as doing a citizen's arrest and different details. Please miss me with that. Because if the same thing keeps happening over and over and over again to the same group of people, at some point, not only does somebody need to speak up and say something about it, but the people need to say, that's not an accident. That's not an accident. And the word says that in Micah chapter 6, verse 8, that what does God require from us? What does he require from us? It is our responsibility outside of it, whether you believe in God and Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit and in it, it's your responsibility to speak up for what is right. And that is wrong. And my heart goes out to all of the families who will no longer have him a part of their life. Another young lady in Louisville, shot and murdered again. And I don't know what it is, why people are so threatened by a certain group of people. We can be doing everyday action. They're literally sleep in their home. Sleep in their home. That is literally the most relaxed position you can have. If you are ever supposed to be safe, it's at home sleep. Police bust in, knock the door down, and shoot her 8 times. Now, they say that they were looking for somebody who already was in custody. And so what really angers me about the situation is, see, these people who are in charge, you are in a position of authority. It's your job to protect and to serve. When you go against justice like this, and I'm not saying every white person is bad, and I'm not saying every cop is bad. That's not true. There are some who mess it up for everybody. So let me preface it by saying that. When you commit these types of actions, you not only go against people, you go against God. Because you are going against justice and you are going against what is right. And if we are believers, it is our responsibility to speak up for that. It doesn't matter how we do it, as long as it's positive and it's pleasing to God. So if that's a social media post, or if that's correcting somebody that's in your vicinity, this is not pleasing to God. This is not pleasing to God. And all of that is happening right now during this pandemic, and people are losing. Lives are being lost and people are hurting. And my message to you all during that time is that God is still in control. I know it don't seem like it a lot of times. I know those who are against the faith may say, well, look at this. It's proof as that God is in control. He's still in control. The problem is there are a lot of things that people don't understand. And when they don't understand those things, they fill the gap themselves. So when they don't have answers to stuff, they fill it up themselves. That's why anytime something bad happens, we want to know why. No one says, oh man, that was really messed up. Okay, on to the next. No, man, that's messed up. I want to know why. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to know why. But to the skeptics, I just want people to understand that God is still in control. And more importantly than that, God is going to rectify all of those wrongs. Yes. He has a plan to go about doing that. It's a plan that most people don't understand. And so therefore they fill those gaps that they don't understand on their own. So they'll say, oh, well, it must be that. No, it's foul, it's disgusting, and somebody had to speak up for it. And if we serve a God that is all about justice, and we know that he's all about justice because he sent someone to save us so that we wouldn't be on the other side of unrighteousness. So if he's all about justice, then it's on us to speak up for those things. And a lot of people during those times, like I said, you wonder what's going on, you wondering where God is. God is still on his throne. God does not tell us why. He does not tell us every single time why something happens. But that doesn't change who he is. Just like if a kid kept asking, Mommy, can I have this for dinner? Daddy, can I have this? And just because you don't answer them in that moment, that doesn't mean that they just get to completely deny you altogether. So if you ask them, can you have some cookies and candy before dinner, and then you don't get any answer, you don't see a kid turn around and say, oh, I guess they don't exist anymore. But that's what people do to God, though. Because they either don't get the answer that they want, or they don't get any answer at all, and then they fill the gap themselves. And by filling the gap themselves, I mean executing your version of justice. And creating this finite human reasoning as to why something happened. And I heard a pastor on social media, and he said a statement that really stuck out to me too. He said, and I'm not calling any names or anything like that. I'm not putting down any churches or any traditional churches or anything of that nature. But he made a statement that was alarming to me. He said, most pastors aren't going to speak up about this because they're worried about the backlash. And I'm thinking to myself, like, you're literally in position to speak up for it. That's literally your job, is to speak up. If you're not doing that, what are you doing? You're in position to shepherd God's people and to lead them somewhere. If you can't show them that you stand for righteousness, then what are you doing? That is literally the number one job to stand up for what's right. So it's right when you tell the congregation that Christ came to die for your sins. That is true. It's right when you tell your congregation, hey, you should tithe. It's right that you do da-da-da-da-da-da. But if something so basic as human life being lost, and you are scared to speak out against that because you're afraid you're going to get backlash on the other end of that, God be with you. Because we see in Matthew that it says that God is going to clearly tell somebody, a group of people, depart from me, I never knew you. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be every mega church pastor that there is. I'm not saying that. All I'm saying is that when you are in a position and you're shepherding over hundreds and thousands of people, it should be the most basic thing to stand up for what's right. And a lot of times, like I said, people wonder, what's going on and different things like that. God knows, man. He knows. He knows better than you. He knows how many days you've been searching. He knows what issues you've been dealing with, whether you tell him or not. He knows your struggles. Turn me to Psalms, the 56th chapter. And anytime I feel distant after a long day at work or a rough week or whatever it is, whatever I feel that has pushed me or I feel myself shifting away, I go back to this scripture and it brings me back. Psalms chapter 56, verse 8. It says, you number my wanderings, you put my tears in your bottle. Are they not in your book? He says, you number my wanderings. God knows how many times you've thought about this, you've thought about that. He says his thoughts towards you are as countless as the sand on the seashore. He knows it. Every tear that you have cried, you didn't wipe that tear away. God has that tear. He put that tear in a bottle. Are they not in your book? That's another way of saying, don't you got a record of it? You know how many times. You know how many times I thought about acting up at work. You know how many times I thought about retaliating on somebody that did me wrong. You know how many tears I cried because I lost a loved one or I've been done wrong. You know that. These are the things that happen when we have the right structure. But if we don't have the right structure, you won't see anything wrong with what we just talked about. Your view is off, it's skewed. And then sometimes we can be humbled the way he humbled Nebuchadnezzar in the word. Or you can be humbled the way we saw in Psalms 139 when we realize, man, he is God the Father. He does know this. He knows my struggles. He knows my weaknesses. He knows that I'm not quite ready for that. I've been praying for that for a long time. And the reason, probably the reason I haven't gotten it yet, because he knows I ain't ready for it. That might be it. You number my wonders. You put my tears into your bottle. Are they not in your book? A little backstory there. It says the psalmist is confident that God has a particular interest in every pain and every tear. He also knows the great truth that comes from the meaning of God's name. The Lord is for us. The Lord is for us. So I challenge you, to have that right structure as it pertains to the pandemic and as it pertains to social issues, particularly brutality against people of color, because if this were happening to another group of people, it didn't matter who they are, what color skin they are, it still would be wrong. It's wrong. And I think about it all the time, like, well, what if that were you? I mean, I know a countless number of people, even speaking from my own experience, where I've been in situations with law enforcement and I felt less than safe. I'm a school teacher. I got stopped in front of my school one time because I flashed my lights and it blinded the cop. He was on the oncoming direction and he stopped me in front of my school. And I asked him, could you pardon me? I'm just getting to work early because, I want to get some work in for my students. And I felt less than safe. I had to let him know, hey, you know, I'm reaching for my license inside of my compartment. And then he sarcastically reached his hand inside of my car to show me how to turn my lights off. Now, what would have happened had I not been in front of my school? If it was another stretch of highway, what could have been? And then some people might say, oh, well, that's just a one-time incident. I'm glad you said that. Because 2 weeks after that, I was driving down the same road and I saw another cop car come behind me. And once he saw me turn into the school, he turned around and circled back out and left. So it's happening on a regular basis. Not to mention, there are a countless number of cases and situations that we will not know about because nobody recorded it. And so the God that we serve is not pleased with that. He is a God of justice. And like I said, most importantly, in that he is going to rectify all that's been wrong. And those whose lives have been cut short, he will bring you back to life one way. But remember, it's a part of his plan. And once that plan has already been in motion, it was started before we got here. Nothing can stop the plan. It's just that most people don't understand that plan and they fill the gap themselves. But you got to have that right structure so that we can understand that plan. Because I have a phrase, me and my friends, we have a phrase, it's called keeping our head about us. So that means like when things are going wrong, how are you when things are going wrong around us? Do I have the right structure to realize that, hey, God is still in control? Do I have that right structure to realize that God is in heaven? I'm on earth, let my words be few. Do I have that right structure? Because if I don't, everything I do from that point forward is going to be a result of that. And I think a lot of times, often I'm like, man, you know what? Like, what type of person would I be if I didn't know God? I know I'd be selfish. Almost selfish now, almost. Without realizing it. I probably would be greedy. And even worst of all, I probably wouldn't even be alive. All because that's how important it is to have the right structure. Because if you don't have that right structure, it can lead you, I said this last time, it can lead you to a situation where you can be devoured. Because don't the words say that Satan roars around seeking whom he may devour. So people may minimize and say, oh, no, I'll still be good without the right structure. No, you won't. It is literally a matter of life and death. So I say that to comfort those who have experienced loss during this pandemic, who have experienced all sorts of pain during this pandemic. As we speak right now, I'm still trying to get down to see my grandfather, you know, to give him a proper goodbye because he lived 91 years and wouldn't be here without him. And you're talking about somebody that's righteous and hardworking, man. He was still active well into his 80s. And somebody that can pray, man, will wake you up praying. He always had this phrase with my brother Lambert. He would always say from everlasting to everlasting. So I take comfort in the fact that we'll see him again one day. Absolutely. Now, this is another bulk of what we're going to go into today. We're going to be fighting against, we're going to have the right structure, but we're going to have that right structure to fight against culture's idea of God. And this is the continuation. Last time I spoke on undoing a lot of the things that we learned about God and about church, because the reality is most people have not ever had an accurate view of God. And it's not to any fault of their own. It may have been the situation that they grew up in. There may have been somebody at church that did something to them and taught them the wrong way inadvertently. The list goes on and on. But whatever the reason is, there are a number of people who have not had an accurate view of God. And so we're gonna talk about going against that idea of culture's idea of God. Because it's so funny, even when I look at the news and stuff like that, and, you know, churches are shut down for the most part, because a lot of people, church is a huge part of our culture. And I think people realize that even more so now after the pandemic. But when I hear them refer to the people of faith, you know, like they're just this distant group of people. Oh, they're crazy. They're over there. They're minding it. They don't mind them. They're the people of faith. Like that. So nobody else gets penalized for believing what they believe. But if there's Christians that believe it, there's a distinction made among us, and we're the loony ones. So if I was over there and I made my own religion, and I had a tree, and I made this tree God, nobody would bat an eye to that. They would say, oh, that's kind of cool. That's what's up. Yeah. But then if I say I'm going to go to church and I'm going to not be perfect, but I'm going to go to church, right? Whatever level I'm on, I'm going to go, I'm going to read my Bible, I'm going to sing, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Automatically, there's a distinction made when you put in another category. You're looked at differently. Because you can tell that based off the way they refer to you. But if I'm an unbeliever, or if I'm an agnostic, which is people who don't know one way or another, like, I'm not ignorant enough to be negative towards those people, because it might be a God. And then you got another group of people who say, oh, there is no God. And then you got another group of people who say, well, I got a God, it's just this God. Like we said earlier with Dagon. And not minimizing anybody of another faith. Doesn't make them bad people. Not saying they're going to hell, any of that. All I'm saying is there's always this distinction and this stereotype that's associated with Christians and people who believe this word. And so we're going to go against that today. Why? I shouldn't say we. God is already going against that. So it's like, why do people view God and the church the way that they do? Like we were saying earlier, you learned it. It's learned that. You learned that, these sometimes the church cliches, you've learned that. You've learned that you just go to church. And I think back, and not to put down the previous generation that came before me, but a lot of times I ask people, and I'm like, okay, because I like to nitpick, I like to pick people's brains. So I'm like, okay, like, what did you do when you went to church? And they're like, well, we went every week. And I'm like, okay, so like, what did you get out of it? Oh, we just kind of went every week. And I'm like, okay, so like, I need more than that though. That's culture's idea. That's why the world and culture, they look at church a certain way, because the people who are representing that aren't doing it from the word. And I'm not talking about people who make a mistake or mistakes. I'm talking about people who are consistently in a pattern of life that completely goes against what God has. And that's where they get their idea from. So if you automatically tell, and it's so funny because if I tell somebody, hey man, I'm going to do this. Oh, you a preacher? I'm like, dude, I just said I'm going to church. That's all. Like, I'm just like anybody else. Which, by the way, if we're being technical, we are all preachers and believers, technically. Because I'm not any more closer to God than anybody else. My life isn't more valuable than anybody else. But they get this idea, and it gets on my nerves that there's this stereotype of God and church and Christianity. And if you tell somebody that you're trying to do right, they automatically put you in this category of being holy. And they automatically put you in this category of being goody. But if I told you I was going to go do some drugs, you wouldn't have a problem with that. Or anything else. That's what we do. It's not biblical. And anytime I urge people, anytime you see something that somebody does and you're questioning whether or not it's from God, look into the word and see, is it biblical? Look into the word and see, is it biblical? Because there are about 6 or 7 billion people on earth. The United States has about 330 million people. So, if you divide that number up, so you're looking at maybe around somewhere 1 in about 20 people. So that means most people don't have an accurate image of who God is in the world. We're not talking about in Georgia or in the Southeast or even in the country. Most people don't, think about that. Most people don't even know the loving creator God in the Bible. They know this God that other people have created. This Jesus with long hair who was white and was born on December 25th. and was in the grave for 2.5 days, even though he said he was going to be in the grave for 3 days and 3 nights. They have the wrong image of him. And then from there, that creates the stereotype. Then if someone else says, I'm trying to do better, I'm not all the way there yet, or I'm just choosing to do this, then you have this whole idea against you. But when I look at it, turn to Matthew chapter 9. Matthew chapter 9, we're gonna start at verse 9. But when I look at the word, and I'm careful because it's like I told you, I'm not perfect. I'm not, anything close to it. I'm not anything close to it. But when I think about God, I think to myself, I'm like, man, there ain't, like, what can I do to get away from him? We just read that in the word. Like, so many people have been hurt by church, and they've been hurt by the idea of God that they don't even want to try. And they have seen the wrong example, and they've seen the misrepresentation of it. But then when I look at the word, I see somebody completely different. One of the many reasons that people wanted to take Jesus out of the game was because he associated himself with people that they thought they were better than. He associated himself with people that they thought. So you're putting yourself above them. You're better than them. Why? Because you have a job, because you have a big house, because you have a nice car, because why are you putting yourself above them? And those who are not familiar with the text, there were a group of religious leaders called the Pharisees. And the Pharisees, in some kind of way, they felt that they were higher and above the people of the day, not only because they were in charge, but they felt like they were closer to God because they kept all of these little itty bitty laws. And so they would see Jesus in public, and then they would try to put him in a situation where they could catch him doing wrong, because for a great part of his, obviously even before he got here, they tried to kill him, but during his ministry, they tried to catch him in wrongdoing a lot of times. And one of the ways they try to catch him in wrongdoing is by associating with the wrong people and trying to get him to say the wrong thing. But obviously, Jesus is God incarnate. He knew what they were doing. He knew what he was up against, even to the point where there were times where he would tell people their thoughts. So when it comes to culture's idea of God and church and Christianity, let's see what a biblical example really looks like. We're going to start in Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. It says, as Jesus passed on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax office. And he said to them, follow me. So he arose and followed him. Verse 10, now it happened as Jesus sat at a table in the house that behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? So automatically they got an attitude with what he's doing. He is associated, like, kind of like in high school days where you can sit where you wanted and during lunchtime. And, why are you sitting with them? What is them? Why would you? They're not good enough. They're not good enough. So I love to give you guys backstory of scripture, because I think a lot of times, the word's original language text is not English. So I like to give backstory so people can understand the deeper meaning behind scripture. So sometimes when you read scripture, you may not get the entire meaning every time, right? Just based off what it says right there. So I'm gonna give you a backstory to Matthew chapter 9. It says, in order to understand the significance of Jesus eating with sinners, we first must understand the people who sought to use Jesus' actions as an assault on his character and ministry. Like we were talking about earlier, the Pharisees. It says the Pharisees were one of two Jewish parties that ruled Israel during the time of Christ. Although the Pharisees accepted the written word, which at that time was the Old Testament, because the New Testament hadn't been written yet, as inspired by God, they gave equal authority to their own oral traditions. And that's what Jesus referred to as tradition of the elders. So Jesus was a rabbi. So his rabbinic regulations for the Pharisee forbade them from eating with sinners. According to them, sinners were Jews who did not adhere to the law of Moses, nor the additional difficult to know and follow. So you're lowering people. You're putting them into this category that you're better than them for something that they don't even know. And then obviously if they don't know, it ain't something that they can't do. So you're penalizing them for that. So Pharisee rules and regulations, sinners included those who lived immoral lifestyles as well as Jewish tax collectors, who was Matthew. Matthew was a tax collector. The disciples were minding their own business when Jesus came through, tapped them on the shoulder and was like, yo, bro, follow me. So that means they had to stop whatever they were doing, whatever job you had, whatever your occupation was. If that's over with, come follow me. So Matthew was a tax collector. So people looked at tax collectors like they were shady because they would take advantage of people in a lot of instances during that day. So you're passing along the road, and so you have to pay a fee. That's why I hate going to New York. I spent like $30 on tolls one time. But anyway, so they would charge the people more than what they were supposed to be charged, which is obviously wrong. So people had a disdain for tax collectors. So when Jesus told Matthew, come follow me, he was a tax collector, and then you went and ate with tax collectors. It's like, dude, you're too good for them. Why are you sitting with them? They're evil, they're wrong, they're bad. So then it says, Jewish tax collectors were especially despised since they were viewed as traitors to their own people by collecting taxes on behalf of the Roman overlords. And I'm giving you this backstory so you can understand, because if you just read tax collectors, you won't really understand what it is. So even now today, people don't look at what the IRS, they don't look at them in the best light, but we still don't look at them as, like the way the tax collectors were viewed back during that time. So for a Pharisee, eating with a sinner or a tax collector, like Jesus did in the text, we're going to see, that was considered to defile themselves. Now, I don't know how good they thought they were, but there's nobody that I can sit down with that I would be like, man, I'm defiling myself by sitting down with you. Like, I'm not that good of a person. The person that I'm sitting with may look at me and say that, but I'm not that good of a person. So it says, for the Pharisee, righteousness came through ritual purity and separation from sinners. So your righteousness came from doing this ritual thing over and over and over again, and then staying away from other people. That was your whole belief system. Not having a loving, genuine relationship with God, but me being ritualistic and staying away from other people that I consider to be bad. So when Jesus called the tax collector, Matthew, to come and follow him, and then he ate at Matthew's home, the Pharisees saw this as scandalous, and they used this as an opportunity to get Jesus caught up. All right, so now with all that, let's go back to the text. Let's go to verse 10. It says, now it happened as Jesus sat at the table in the house that behold, many tax collectors and sinners came and sat down with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? When Jesus heard that, he said to them, those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. So basically, people who are sick, they're the ones that need the most attention. So if you go to a hospital, I don't advise you to go to a hospital now because of what we got going on, but if you go to a hospital under normal circumstances, you see doctors tending to the people who need it the most. Everybody's there needs something, just like we still need him as believers. But there are those who need it more. That's why we have an emergency room. The idea is that they get pushed to the front first. They need it more. So those people, I tie all that back to say there are people who have this idea about God, church, and Christianity that there are only certain people who can come to him. There are only certain people who have to be good enough. God came mainly for those. He came for everybody, but there are certain people who need him more. And this is a biblical example of the heart of God. Jesus didn't turn around and say, hey, man, you know what? You're right. Why am I sitting here with them? I'm out. No, he didn't say that. He said, those who are sick need me the most. And that is how you combat culture's idea of Christianity, God, church cliches, blessed and highly favored. The biblical version of God. Now, sometimes, you know, and like I was saying earlier, I don't know what type of person I would be, you know, if I didn't know God, or even if I would still, you know, be here to this day. But I look at it like, I think about it sometimes like this, and I feel like this is the Lord showing me too. It's like, you know how, like sometimes I'll see people and I'll hear them talking about how God has turned their life around, right? And so then I think to myself, I'm like, wow, that's great. You know, he turned their life, whatever life they were living before, it doesn't matter. He turned their life around. He saved them. I think we were even watching it yesterday. God saved a young man. He was addicted to drugs, and God saved him. And so I would hear them talk about that. And then when I was younger, I used to think, well, man, am I experiencing that same thing? Am I feeling that same thing? And then I felt the Lord showing me, he was like, the reason why you don't have that same experience is because you've never been without me. So it's like, you know, like you feel the difference when you walk into a room that's been really cold, and then you go outside, you can automatically feel the difference. There are some of us who have always believed. So therefore, it's harder for us to see the difference. So my experience is not going to be the same as somebody that he delivered from drugs, or he delivered from another addiction, or whatever the case may be. I can feel, they felt the temperature change. I didn't. But it goes back to cultural idea of God, church, and Christianity. They will point to somebody that has been in the faith their entire life, and they will ask them, and the people, they don't know how to respond. And so they will use that as a justification and evidence to stop believing whatever it is that you believe, just because you can't feel the temperature shift. I was born into this. I don't know what it's like to not have him. Doesn't make me more valuable than anybody else. But there is somebody else who has another story. They were born into a messed up situation. They didn't have their mother and their father. They lost somebody really important to them at an early age. So they can feel the temperature shift more than I can. And I thought about it too. I'm like, man, I'm 31 years old. I have sacrificed my life in a sense, because there are certain principles that I live by. And like I was saying earlier, it's not about being good enough or fault, because we all fall short. Like the word says, if we keep it real, we all fall short. But there are some who have sacrificed their entire life, and there's something they don't do just because they have made that choice. They have made that decision. They have sacrificed. And so if anything, I don't know of a greater example than someone who has chosen to live a sermon rather than tell one. Because that's what you do. That is your living example. That is having the right structure when it comes to culture and ideas about God, church, and Christianity. Is you actually living that life. You actually realizing that you're not better than anybody else just because someone else may have struggled for a longer period of time, or someone else didn't grow up the same way you grew up. We see it even then. Let's turn to Acts chapter 26 really quick. And we know Paul's story, right? He was Saul first, and then he turned to Paul. And we know, and those who don't know, familiar with Paul's story, Paul was trapped. Paul used to be a persecutor of Christians. He used to kill believers. If you said you believed in Jesus during his time, he had you killed. So he went from living that life to living another life where he was literally on the opposite end of the spectrum. And he even called himself, he said, I'm the worst of all people, man. Like, it's kind of hard for me, and not these exact words, but he's like, it's kind of hard for me to live with myself after me doing what I did. So so backstory again, Paul faced all kinds of persecution. He was shipwrecked, whipped publicly. I mean, you name it. If it was a bad situation, he was in it. And he wrote almost half of the New Testament. 13 out of 27 books Paul wrote in the New Testament. So he's in a situation where he has to speak for himself. So he's standing before a king. And so this is another example of how Paul had a temperature change. He could see, Paul knew what it was like to not have God and not have the real Jesus. He knew that. So this is him when he was speaking for himself. It says, Paul stretched out his hand and he answered for himself. I think myself happy, King Agrippa, because today I shall answer for myself because you're concerning all the things of which I am accused by the Jews, especially because you are expert in all customs and questions and have to do with the Jews. Therefore, I beg you to hear me patiently. So he's speaking on his own behalf. He's in a situation where he had to speak up for himself. And he gives his whole backstory. He says, my manner of life from my youth, which was spent from the beginning among my own nation in Israel, all the Jews know. So basically, everybody that's Jewish, they know the life I used to live. He says, they knew me from first if they were willing to testify that according to the strictest sect of our religion, I lived as a Pharisee. He was like the strictest, most religious person. I was him. He says, and now I stand and am judged for the hope of the promise made by God to our fathers. To this promise, our 12 tribes earnestly serving God night and day hope to attain. For this hope's sake, King Agrippa, I am accused by the Jews. Why should it be thought incredible by you that God raised the dead? Indeed, I myself thought I must do many things contrary to the name of Jesus of Nazareth. This I also did in Jerusalem, and many of the saints I shut up in prison, having received authority from the chief priests. And when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them. And I punished them often in every synagogue and compelled them to blaspheme. And being exceedingly enraged against them, I persecuted them even to foreign cities. So he's like, yo, every bad thing that could have been done to those believers, I had a hand in it. So then we see the temperature change right here for him. He says, while this occupied, I journeyed to Damascus with authority and commission from the chief priest. At midday, O king, along the road, I saw a light from heaven brighter than the sun shining around me and those who journeyed with me. And when we all had fallen to the ground, I heard a voice speaking to me and saying in Hebrew language, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. So I said, who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and stand on your feet, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to make you a minister and a witness both of the things which you have seen and of the things which I will yet reveal. I will deliver you from the Jewish people as well as from the Gentiles, to whom I now send you, to open their eyes in order to turn them from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and an inheritance among those who are sanctified by faith in me. Now let's go over. We're going to go down to verse 22. It says, therefore, having obtained help from God, to this day I stand witnessing both to small and great, saying no other things than those which the prophets and Moses said to would come, that the Christ would suffer, that he would be the first to rise from the dead, and would proclaim light to the Jewish people and to the Gentiles. So he basically was saying, this is how God told me I was going to be used. Now, as he made his defense, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, you are beside yourself. Much learning is driving you mad. So basically somebody interrupted him and said, man, you're going crazy, man. But he said, I am not mad, most noble Festus, but speak the words of truth and reason. For the king, before whom I also speak freely, knows these things. For I am convinced that none of these things escapes his attention, since this thing was not done in a corner. Like everybody saw this. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know that you do believe. Then King Agrippa said to Paul, you almost persuaded me to become a Christian. So Paul told his story of how he had his temperature change, how he was converted. And that is another biblical example of what culture should look at when they have their idea of God, church, and Christianity. Because Paul basically was saying, I was blind, now I see. If people had this accurate image of who God really is, and they knew who, and they could really, if he really revealed himself, now he's going to do it one day on a grand scale when he comes back. But if people had a glimpse of who he really is, they would not go against it. They would run to this because they know that this is love. This is not judgment. This is a genuine relationship with God. And Paul was showing you how his temperature changed. He had a time period where he was like, I was the strict, most religious person ever. And then I went from having that to having a real relationship with God. So, I mean, the truth is, is that it makes sense. And when I think of culture's ideas and their vantage and their viewpoint of what church is like, it's like, if what I believe is true, is it worth singing about? Like, if what I believe is true, is it worth meeting up with other people who believe this? If it's true now. I always joke with my brother about, he a lawyer, he always say, allegedly. If this is allegedly true, if this Bible that so many people have professed to believe in, if it's allegedly true, is it worth singing about? Is it worth gathering for? Is it worth any of those things? Because my answer to culture's viewpoint on God, Church of Christianity, is if it is true, then it is worth it. Allegedly. All right, so let's turn to Matthew chapter 19. Actually, I'm sorry, go to Matthew chapter 4, verse 19. Yeah, Matthew chapter 4, verse 19. Actually, we'll start at verse 18 so we can get the gist of it. Matthew chapter 4, verse 18, it says, and Jesus walking by the Sea of Galilee saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and Andrew, his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishermen. Then he said to them, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. They immediately left their nets, and they followed him. And then let's turn to Matthew chapter 19, and verse 27. And then it says, then Peter answered and said to him, see, we have left all. Actually, let's go back. Let's go back to verse 25. Well, actually, let's go to 23. It says, Jesus said to the disciples, surely I say to you that it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And again, I say to you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. When his disciples heard it, they were greatly astonished, saying, who then can be saved? But Jesus looked at them and said to them, with men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. Then Peter answered and said to him, see, we have left all and followed you. Therefore, what shall we have? So Jesus said to them, surely I say to you that in the regeneration, when the Son of Man sits on the throne of his glory, you who have followed me will also sit on 12 thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. And everyone who has left houses, or brothers, or sisters, or father, or mother, or wife, or children, or lands for my sake, not if you went out on your own, but if he said you left them for my sake, shall receive 100-fold and inherit eternal life. But many who are first will be last, and the last first. So we see in the text where it says people were minding their business, living their life, and then Jesus interrupted that, shifted their pattern, and said, follow me. And then it goes on to say, man, we gave up all of this stuff because we believed in you and we followed you. What am I going to get for it? And then Christ said, you will be rewarded. Anything that you gave up for me, you're going to get 100 times that. Does that shift culture's idea of God and church and Christianity then, if they knew that if they were following a God that could give them back more than they ever gave up? Would that change the way they look at God, church and Christianity? That is a biblical example of counting the cost. And there's nothing that's going to be great that you're not going to have to sacrifice for. So I think back to my college days when I played basketball, and I think back to the year that we won the championship. I remember sacrificing most that year. When everybody was out on Christmas break, we were in the gym. It was cold. It was freezing. When we were at practice after, till 9, 10 o'clock at night, and everybody else was in their dorm room doing whatever, I was sacrificing something because I was trying to get something bigger. And they can't see that. They're not going to get that. And then it came a time when everybody was there, and then all that sacrificing, it made sense. And it's the same thing with our walk. But the problem is culture does not realize all they see is what we're doing now. Oh, they're meeting, they're doing that. Oh, that's them. They're over all those, don't worry about them. Christians, believers, silly people. If they had this biblical example to follow, and they knew that we don't do what we do because we're better than anybody. We do what we do because we want to follow the one that made us. That is how you combat culture's idea of God, church, and Christianity, biblically. And so lastly, I want to challenge you all to go deeper and to cause God to be more real to you, simply put. You get into his word, and it's like, well, how do I do that? And I always leave you guys with practicality. It's like, what does that look like? How do I do that? If I don't know one Bible verse, or if I'm involved in a lifestyle that is not pleasing to God and I don't know anything about him, what do I do? Where do I start? Even if I've messed up so much, what do I do? The first thing is ask. Ask. We read earlier in Psalms 139 that regardless of who you are, God already knows your situation. He knows it better than you. He knows what you need, when you need it, how you need it. Ask him. And in the word in James, it says, for those who lack wisdom, ask, and it'll be freely given. That's what it says in the word. And then we also see in the 6th chapter of John that Jesus said that no one who comes to me will I turn away. Go deeper. Ask him. If it's something you don't understand, ask. That's the first step. Ask. Because he already knows. Have a deeper relationship. Mature. Go to the next level. Secondly, read his word. God speaks through his word. It is not just words on a page. It's not like any other book. It's alive. It's living. And not only is it has predicted, and is going, predicting, what will come, as far as prophecy is related. Oftentimes I look and I stop, and if you just turn on the TV, turn on the news, and you see the actions of people, you'll be like, man, that word is true, man. Because I see people doing the same thing right now in 2020 that they were doing in the Bible days. You'll see it. And I think I heard a preacher a little while ago, he outlined everything, all the Bible characters, he outlined all their flaws and all the stuff that they did. And it sounded like a soap opera. Somebody had somebody else set up, tried to have them killed. Somebody was a murderer. Somebody couldn't speak well. Somebody ran from God. Somebody tried to interject themselves into his plan. It goes on and I look back at that and I say, man, it is true, man. The word is true. The nature of people, how we are as people. Lovers of self, lovers of money, more than God, putting things above him, like shadiness, all of that type of stuff. It's in the word. People don't realize how it relates to them, but it's in the word, though. So if we want to go deeper in our relationship, read his word. He will speak to you through that way primarily. Turn to Psalms 37. Psalms 37 says, we're going to go with verse 4. It says, delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Commit your way to the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. That is how we can get closer to him, delighting ourselves in him. Not every time we get bored, we just come to him. Or when there's nothing on TV, we come to him. Or if I ain't doing nothing else, I'm not hanging out with nobody, then I just come to him. What if you had a relationship with somebody and the only time you heard from them was when you needed something, when they needed something? You would feel some kind of way. But we don't think about it like that because God is supposed to be this far off being. And so if I, don't give him any type of attention, he's okay. We don't think about it like that. Reading his word, and we can go deeper in there. But I gotta have the right structure to realize that I need to read his word. I gotta have an accurate image of who God is and my position and my relationship with him to understand that I need to delight myself, like it say in the word, and that I need to trust him and trust in somebody I can't see, I can't hear, I can't feel. That comes with maturity. That's how I have a deeper relationship with him, by having the right structure. And then meditating on his word. Think deeply about it. One of the things I always do when I look at the word is like, well, how do I apply that in my life? What does that look like? It looks like seeing somebody in need and helping them. It looks like being in line at the grocery store, and if you got it, maybe taking care of somebody's tab. It looks like simple as I was on the store the other day, and somebody couldn't reach something off the top shelf. Grab it. It can be that simple. And it may seem small, but they were not going to get it if I wasn't on that aisle. The stores are out of things. And are people still grabbing toilet paper like by the droves? I'm gonna leave that toilet paper. I talked about it last time I was here, man. Toilet paper. People losing their mind over that. But until then, until believers, until we go deeper, we're gonna continue to have a surface level relationship with God. And then you only call on them when you really, really need them. And then that's how people don't get over the monotony of church. They don't get over the monotony of the Bible. They get burnt out, and then eventually they drop off because they weren't deep in it. And that's because somewhere along the way, they didn't have the right structure. And so they blew over like the bridge. They blew over. And I feel bad too, because I'm like, well, sometimes people don't have anywhere to take their burden. Where are you taking your burden? Like, if I'm my highest authority, then I'm in trouble. I think back like a few months ago, I had to have a tooth removed, and I was sitting in the chair, and the dentist lady, she was explaining to me, why they had to have the tooth removed, and instead of just feeling it. And she was like, if we feel over it, there's going to be nowhere for the pain to go in. And she said, if you think you're in pain now, you're going to really be in pain later on. And so I thought to myself, like, that's kind of like how people who don't know God are, though. They don't have anywhere. It's nowhere for it to go. Where are you going with it? Because I don't trust myself that much. Because I'll get tired. I'll get sleepy. I'll forget. But somebody who has been here since the beginning of time, who doesn't get tired, who doesn't get sleepy, who knows everything and is everywhere, we trust him with it. And that's why I always say it's so important to have that right structure. So when we think about having the right structure, part two, man, it's like, do I have that accurate view of my relationship as it pertains to God? Like, does God like get my leftovers when I get home from work and I'm tired? Or am I waking up a little bit early so I can maybe pray or read the scripture before I leave out the house? Like, is he getting leftovers? Like, do I treat people less than how they should be treated because I don't have an accurate view of God? Because if we look at the word, it says love God first, then you know how to love people. But that all comes from having the right structure. So I challenge you all as you go forward to have the right structure, to never lose sight of who we actually follow. Don't lose sight of that, even during tough times, even in times when we're being brutalized, even in times, because we don't, like the word say, this is a whole other message for another time, but the word say it's going to get worse. So can we keep our head about us during those times? That all comes from having the right structure.